Everett Kane stood by the wagon, the photograph feeling flimsy in his calloused hands. It showed a woman, delicate and small, with a waist a man could circle with his hands. The train had hissed to a stop a full 30 minutes ago. Every other passenger was long gone, swallowed by the dusty town. But something was wrong, deeply wrong. From the last car he could hear voices, not happy voices. They were sharp, angry. The conductor sounded flustered, arguing with someone who refused to get off. Everett's thumb smoothed over the faded image of the woman who'd written to him for 6 long months. Her letters spoke of dreams, of a quiet life, of a desperate need to escape a past she never quite explained. He thought he was rescuing a sparrow, but as the heavy door of the train car slid open with a groan, Everett realized he hadn't been talking to a sparrow at all. He'd been writing to a storm. The conductor practically stumbled out, his face beet red, muttering apologies to no one. And then she appeared. She filled the entire doorway, blocking out the sun. Tessa Ford was magnificent, but not in the way he'd imagined. The woman in the photo was a ghost. This woman was a force of nature. Her curves were generous, proud. Her auburn hair was a wildfire catching the midday light, and her emerald eyes blazed with a fire that was equal parts defiance and sheer terror. She was twice the size he'd been led to believe. Strong, powerful, where he'd pictured fragile and meek. But it wasn't her size that sent a cold spike of dread through his gut. It was the bag, a worn leather satchel clutched to her chest like a shield. She held it with a white-knuckled grip, as if it contained the answer to every question he was afraid to ask. The reason she'd traveled 2,000 miles, the reason she had lied. The silence between them was a living thing, a deep canyon carved by unmet expectations. Tessa stood frozen in the train doorway, her knuckles bone-white around that leather bag. Down on the platform, Everett stood rooted to the spot, the photograph in his hand now feeling like a fool's token. People bustled past, their faces a blur, but Everett and Tessa were locked in their own world, a world of silent accusations and unspoken fears. The conductor cleared his throat, a loud, awkward sound in the sudden quiet, and mumbled something about being late before scurrying away. Everett had played this moment out in his mind 1,000 times over the winter. He'd pictured himself lifting a light, small woman from the steps, her shy smile a reward for his patience. Now he found himself staring up at a woman who commanded the space around her, a woman who looked like she could break a man in two. Her dress, a deep, travel-worn blue, was stretched taut across her frame. But it looked dignified, not strained. Her face, framed by wild auburn curls, held a raw, powerful beauty the tiny photograph had completely failed to capture. It hadn't just been a lie. It had been an erasure of who she truly was. "You are Everett Kane," she said. Her voice was steady, but he heard the tremor hiding beneath it. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. "Yes, ma'am," he managed, folding the photograph and tucking it away in his vest. It felt like bearing a dream. "You must be Miss Ford." Her eyes darted to the pocket where the picture vanished, and a flicker of raw pain crossed her face. It was there and gone in a second. "I imagine," she said, her voice low, "that I am not what you expected." The blunt honesty of it struck him harder than any lie could have. For 6 months, he'd built a fantasy from her words, from that one misleading image. She wrote a poetry and sewing of a gentle hand with children. She never once wrote about the truth of herself. "The wagon is over here," he said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. He nodded toward the sturdy buckboard hitched to his 2 best horses. The moment the words were out, he saw his mistake. The step up to the wagon seat was high. He'd built it himself, built it for the small, delicate woman from the photograph. Tessa's gaze followed his, and he saw her powerful shoulders sag, just for an instant. "Of course it is," she whispered. She walked toward the wagon, her head held high, a queen approaching a crooked throne. She moved with a surprising grace, each step deliberate. But as she got closer, Everett saw something that tightened his chest. Tears. They welled in the corners of her eyes, shining like unshed diamonds. But she refused to let them fall. "Miss Ford, he started, not even knowing what he meant to say. "Please," she cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. She clutched that leather bag even tighter. Let's just get to your ranch. This arrangement has changed. We both know that. But as they reached the wagon, Everett's blood went cold. Across the street, half hidden in the shadows of the telegraph office, a man in a worn brown coat was watching them with an unnerving intensity. When their eyes met, the stranger gave a slow, deliberate tip of his hat before melting back into the crowd. Tessa hadn't seen him. She was too focused on the impossible wagon step. But Everett had seen him, and he recognized that face from a stack of wanted posters down at the sheriff's office. The only question was, had the man followed Tessa here, or had he been waiting for Everett all along? The wagon step loomed between them, in monument to his foolish expectations. He'd measured and sawed and hammered it into place, picturing a woman half Tessa's size. The thought was so mortifying, he could feel a hot flush creep up his neck. He watched her approach it, her chin held at an angle of pure defiance, but her hands, the ones clutching that mysterious bag, were trembling. "Perhaps if I assist you," Everett offered, his voice gentle. Tessa shot him a look that could have curdled milk. "I have been managing on my own for quite some time, Mr. Kane." She placed one boot on the step, testing it. The wood groaned under her weight but held. He'd built it strong at least. But the height was the problem. She tried to pull herself up but couldn't get the leverage, not while holding the bag and trying to maintain a shred of dignity. After 2 attempts, her face was flushed, her breath coming in ragged bursts. She stepped back, defeated. Everett moved closer. "Miss Ford," he said softly, "there is no shame in accepting help." "Shame?" The word was a bitter pill she spat out. "Mr. Kane, shame and I are old acquaintances. We walk together every day." Before he could think of a reply, she thrust the leather bag at him. "Hold this," she commanded. "Do not open it. Do not even think about what's inside. Just hold it." The bag was shockingly heavy. Something inside shifted with a dull, metallic clink, a sound that made 1,000 questions bloom in his mind. But the look in her eyes was a steel door, warning him away. He took the bag, cradling it in his arms. Freed of her burden, she gathered her skirts, placed her hands on the seat, and hauled herself up into the wagon. The effort was immense, leaving her breathless and red-faced, but she did it. She was on the seat looking down at him. He climbed up beside her and handed back the bag. She snatched it from him, clutching it to her chest like a lost child. "Thank you," she mumbled, refusing to meet his eyes. As he clicked the reins and guided the horses out of town, he risked a glance back toward the telegraph office. The man in the brown coat was there again. This time, he wasn't just watching. He had a small notebook out and was scribbling in it, his eyes darting between the notebook and their departing wagon. A deep, familiar chill snaked down Everett's spine. The last time someone had taken such careful notes about him was 3 years ago. Just before his brother vanished off the face of the earth. Just before the whisper started. "Mr. Kane," Tessa's voice cut through his dark memory. "Your letters mentioned you lived alone, but you never explained why. Why a man with a ranch, with means, is still unmarried at your age?" The question ambushed him. He'd been so wrapped up in the mystery of her, he'd forgotten he was a mystery himself. "Some circumstances," he said carefully, watching the road, "make marriage complicated." What sort of circumstances? He could feel her eyes on him, sharp and intelligent. This wasn't a woman who would be satisfied with a vague answer. But how could he tell her the truth? How could he explain that the last woman he'd courted had disappeared without a trace? That the whole town, on their bad days, suspected he'd had something to do with it? How could he tell her that those same whispers said he'd killed his own brother over a land dispute that never even happened? "The sort of circumstances," he said finally, the words tasting like ash, "that make a man hope for a fresh start with someone who doesn't know the stories people tell." He felt her shift on the seat beside him. He waited for her to recoil, to demand he turn the wagon around. Instead, after a long, tense silence, she just nodded. "I understand the need for fresh starts, Mr. Kane," she said, her voice softer now. "Perhaps we have more in common than we thought." And as they rode on under the vast, uncaring sky, Everett had the terrifying feeling that she was right. They were two strangers, running from their pasts, riding together into a future that felt more dangerous with every turn of the wagon wheels. The ranch came into view as the sun climbed to its highest point, a lonely collection of buildings against a backdrop of endless, rolling plains. It was a modest place, weathered by wind and time, but it was his. He felt Tessa shift on the seat, and he risked a glance at her. She was studying the property, her expression impossible to read, but her grip on that leather bag, he noticed, hadn't loosened an inch the entire ride. "It's smaller than I imagined," she said, but her tone wasn't disappointed. It was just an observation. "Most people expect a palace," Everett replied, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "But it's honest land. It provides for those willing to work it." As the wagon drew closer to the main house, her gaze sharpened, fixing on something that made her whole body go rigid. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice tight, "why are there fresh hoof prints leading right up to your door? And why is that window boarded up?" Everett's stomach plummeted. He'd hoped he'd have time to settle her in, to explain things slowly, gently. But the evidence of his troubles was right there, nailed to the side of his house. The window was where a rock had come crashing through 3 nights ago, followed by a drunken voice shouting his brother's name. The hoof prints were from Sheriff Coleman. He'd been out just yesterday with grim news. New questions were being asked about what happened 3 years ago. "Miss Ford," he started, "there are things about my situation here. We should probably discuss them inside." She turned her head slowly, her green eyes locking onto his. They weren't just intelligent, they were dissecting him. "Prying eyes, Mr. Kane? What kind of trouble are you in?" Before the words could even form in his throat, a sound reached them, the sound of approaching horses, fast. Everett twisted around in his seat, his heart hammering against his ribs. A cloud of dust was boiling up from the road behind them. 3 riders emerging from the haze like specters. His blood ran cold. He recognized Sheriff Coleman's stocky frame and his distinctive gray mustache instantly. But it was the other 2 men who made the air leave his lungs. One was Marcus Webb. His sister Catherine was the woman who had vanished 3 years ago. The woman Everett was accused of courting and then disposing of. Marcus looked at him with a hatred so pure it was like a physical force. And the 3rd rider was the man in the brown coat from the train station. "Mr. Kane," Tessa said, and her voice had a new edge to it, a sharp, cold readiness. "Those men don't look like they're here for coffee." Everett felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind of calm that comes when the thing you've been dreading has finally arrived. He reined in the horses and set the brake. He helped Tessa down from the wagon, and he noticed something odd. She immediately positioned herself with her back to the house, facing the approaching riders, as if she were squaring off for a fight. Whatever was in that bag, whatever her secrets were, she understood danger. Sheriff Coleman dismounted, his face a grim mask. "Everett, we need to talk." Marcus Webb swung off his horse and spat in the dust, his eyes burning holes in Everett. "Talk? I'm done talking. We have proof now, Kane. Proof you killed my sister." The man in the brown coat said nothing. He simply dismounted, pulled out his little notebook, and began to write. Tessa moved an inch closer to Everett's side. He could smell the faint scent of lavender and road dust from her hair. It was a strangely intimate detail in a moment that felt like an execution. "What proof?" Everett asked, his voice hoarse. The sheriff held up his hand. Dangling from his fingers was a small, tarnished silver locket. It swung back and forth, catching the harsh sunlight. "This," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with regret. "Found it yesterday, in the old well behind Miller's abandoned cabin." Everett stared at the locket. His mind went numb. He knew that locket. He had given it to Catherine Webb himself a week before she disappeared. Her initials, CW, were engraved on the back, and Miller's cabin was less than a mile from his own property line. The locket twisted in the sunlight, a silver serpent of accusation. Everett felt the world tilt, the ground unsteady beneath his feet. He had given that locket to Catherine. It had been a simple, hopeful gift during a courtship that had felt just as simple and hopeful. Now it was evidence, a nail for his coffin. "Sheriff," Everett said, his voice struggling to stay level, "I've never been to Miller's cabin. Not once. You know that. I have no reason to go there. Marcus Webb took a menacing step forward, his face a storm of grief and rage. No reason? My sister was wearing that locket the night she went to meet you, the night she never came home. Now it turns up in a well, a stone's throw from your land? You expect us to believe that's a coincidence? The man in the brown coat finally looked up from his notebook. His eyes were cold, like chips of ice. Mr. Kane, he said, his voice flat and official. I'm Detective Harrison, from the Territorial Marshal's office. I've been investigating a series of disappearances across 3 counties. Your name, sir, has come up more than once. Tessa shifted beside him, a solid, grounding presence. He had expected her to back away, to put distance between herself and this spiraling nightmare. Instead, she stood her ground. Detective Harrison, she said, her voice cutting through the tension, clear and strong. What other cases? The detective's eyes flickered toward her, a brief spark of surprise in their icy depths. 3 women have vanished from this region in the last 4 years, Harrison stated, his gaze snapping back to Everett. All of them were last seen in the company of a man matching your description, and in every case, personal items later turned up in remote, hidden locations. Just like this locket. Everett felt like he'd been punched in the gut. He knew about Catherine, of course. Her disappearance had become the shadow he lived under. But 3 other women? The accusation was so monstrous, so far beyond the scope of his own private misery, that he could barely process it. That's impossible, he choked out. I hardly leave this ranch. Everyone knows that. I go to town for supplies, that's it. The sheriff shifted his weight, looking deeply uncomfortable. That's the problem, Everett. Now that we're asking again, people are remembering things. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, she swears she saw you talking at length with that traveling seamstress. The one who went missing last spring. And Murphy over at the saloon? Marcus snarled. He says you bought drinks for the widow Albright the week before she vanished. I bought drinks for half the town, Everett protested, but the words sounded weak, hollow even to his own ears. He could feel the net tightening, woven from whispers and half-remembered moments. Then Tessa did something that stunned them all into silence. She stepped forward. She faced the 3 men, clutching her leather bag like a shield, and her voice rang out with an authority that was absolute. Gentlemen, she said, I may be able to shed some light on this situation. Every eye turned to her, the sheriff, the detective, Marcus, and Everett himself. He felt a dizzying mix of hope and terror. What could this woman, this stranger, possibly know about a past that had been haunting him for years? I have been corresponding with Mr. Kane for 6 months, Tessa continued, her gaze unwavering. But that is not all I have been doing. I have also been investigating the disappearances of women who answered matrimonial advertisements all across this territory. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. You see, she said, her eyes locking with Detective Harrison's. I work for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. The silence that followed was so profound, Everett could hear the blood pounding in his own ears. Detective Harrison's notebook slipped from his suddenly numb fingers and fell into the dust with a soft thud. The sheriff's jaw dropped. Marcus Webb took an involuntary step backward, his face a mask of utter confusion. And Everett just stared at the woman beside him, the mail-order bride who wasn't a bride, the victim who was actually a hunter. Miss Ford, the detective finally managed to say, his voice strained. What exactly are you saying? Tessa turned her head and her green eyes met Everett's. The vulnerability he'd seen at the train station was gone. In its place was a professional fire, a gaze that was sharp enough to cut steel. I'm saying, Mr. Kane, she said, her voice low and clear, that you have been under investigation for months, and the evidence I've gathered suggests one of 2 things. Either you are one of the most clever and dangerous killers this territory has ever seen. She paused, holding his gaze, holding the entire world in suspense. Or you are being framed by someone who wants to see you hang. The word framed hung in the thick, dusty air. Everett stared at Tessa, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the woman from the letters. 6 months of shared hopes, of carefully chosen words, of building a fragile bridge of trust between two strangers. Had it all been a lie? 6 months, he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. 6 months of deception. Tessa's expression softened, just for a moment, a crack in the professional mask. Not deception, Mr. Kane. Omission. Everything I wrote to you about my past, my hopes for a new life, all of it was true. I simply left out my current line of work. Detective Harrison, having recovered his composure and his notebook, looked at Tessa with a new, grudging respect. Agent Ford, the marshal's office was not aware that the Pinkertons had an operative on this case. That's because your office has a leak, Tessa shot back, her tone sharp as a razor. Think about it, Detective. 3 of the 4 disappearances happened within days of your office launching an official inquiry. Someone with access to your communications has been tipping off our suspect, telling him when to hide and when to plant evidence. The sheriff's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. Are you accusing my office, my deputies? I'm suggesting, Tessa said, cutting him off, that the timing of these discoveries is too perfect. Finding this locket now, right when I was scheduled to arrive, it's not a coincidence. It's a trap, and it was set for Mr. Kane. Marcus Webb's rage seemed to have been replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. But if Everett didn't kill Catherine, then who did? And why go to all this trouble to frame him? This was it, the moment of truth. Tessa finally unclasped her leather bag. She reached inside and pulled out a thick folder, overflowing with papers, maps, and photographs. That, she said, is what I came here to find out. She looked directly at Everett. Mr. Kane, your letters were very revealing. You wrote about your daily routines, your property lines, your neighbors. You gave a complete picture of your life. Information, she added, her voice dropping, that would be priceless to someone who wanted to steal it. A chill, colder than any winter wind, washed over Everett. Steal it? You think someone has been impersonating me? I think someone has been wearing your reputation like a coat, Tessa said grimly, using the image of a lonely, respectable rancher to lure women in, while at the same time carefully, piece by piece, building a case against you for their murders. She pulled a photograph from the folder and handed it to Detective Harrison. This was taken by a witness 3 counties over, near where the seamstress disappeared. The man in the picture bears a passing resemblance to Mr. Kane, but look closer. Harrison held the photograph, squinting. The face is similar, but this man is shorter, heavier in the shoulders. Exactly, Tessa confirmed. Someone has been targeting women who would be drawn to a man like Mr. Kane. Women looking for stability, for a life on the land. Women who would be too trusting. Everett's mind was reeling. It wasn't just bad luck or suspicion. It was a deliberate, calculated campaign to destroy him. The whispers, the isolation, the fear he saw in his neighbor's eyes. It had all been orchestrated. If this is true, Sheriff Coleman said, his voice heavy, then the real killer is still out there, and he's still hunting. Tessa's face grew hard as stone. Sheriff, she said, I have reason to believe he has already chosen his next victim. She looked straight at Everett, and for the first time, he saw genuine fear in her eyes. But it wasn't fear for herself. It was for him. He knows I'm here, Mr. Kane, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He's been reading our mail. He knows I'm a detective, and he knows that the only way to complete his plan, to seal your fate forever, is for me to disappear too. Detective Harrison snapped his notebook shut. The sound was like a gavel falling. Agent Ford, if what you're saying is true, we've been dancing to this killer's tune the entire time. Every piece of evidence we found was meant to be found. He's been one step ahead of us because he's been writing the story, Tessa agreed, her composure finally starting to fray at the edges. The trap was sprung 3 weeks ago. I received a letter supposedly from Mr. Kane, but the handwriting was off. Just slightly. It suggested I change my arrival date, come a week later. Everett felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. What did it say? It was clever, Tessa admitted. It mentioned details about your ranch, but they were wrong. It talked about a new barn that doesn't exist, a neighbor you've never mentioned. It was designed to make me think you were opening up more, sharing more details. But a forensic analysis of the handwriting in the paper stock confirmed it. It wasn't from you. Sheriff Coleman wiped a sleeve across his sweaty brow. So the killer wasn't just impersonating Everett to these women. He's been intercepting mail. More than that, Tessa said, her eyes dark with the grim realization. He's been using the entire postal system as his personal hunting ground. Think about it. What better way to find lonely, isolated women than to read the mail sent to matrimonial agencies? He can pick and choose his victims, learn their secrets, their hopes, their fears, all before he ever makes contact. During this, Marcus Webb had gone ghostly pale. He looked like he was about to be sick. Agent Ford, he said, his voice trembling. My sister, Catherine, before she started writing to Everett, she answered other ads. She told me she got strange letters sometimes. Letters that seemed to contradict each other, as if they were from two different men. A collective unspoken horror descended on the small group. This wasn't a simple murderer. This was a predator of unimaginable cunning. A spider who had woven his web across the entire territory, using the mail to catch his prey. Tessa reached into her bag again. This time she didn't pull out a folder. She pulled out a small silver derringer. She checked the load with a practiced, efficient movement that made Everett's breath catch in his throat. Gentlemen, she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. I believe we are being watched. Right now. Everett's head snapped up. His eyes scanned the familiar landscape, but now it looked alien, menacing. The rolling hills, the small groves of cottonwood trees, the crumbling silhouette of the old Miller cabin in the distance. A dozen places to hide. A dozen places for a man with a rifle. The man impersonating Mr. Kane wouldn't set this entire trap, Tessa continued, and then not stick around to watch it spring. What's the plan, Agent? Harrison asked, his hand drifting instinctively to the Colt revolver holstered at his hip. Before Tessa could utter a single word, the afternoon calm was shattered. Crack! The sharp report of a rifle echoed from the hills. Sheriff Coleman cried out, a strangled gasp, and staggered backward. He clutched his shoulder, dark red blood instantly seeping through the fabric of his shirt and between his fingers. The horses screamed and reared in their harnesses. Marcus Webb, his face a mask of terror, dove behind the relative safety of the wagon. Get down! Tessa yelled, grabbing Everett's arm with surprising strength and pulling him down with her behind a stone water trough. The stone was cool against his cheek, a stark contrast to the hot fear coursing through him. Another shot rang out, splintering the wood of the trough just inches above their heads. He's not trying to kill us, Tessa hissed, her breath warm against his ear. Not yet. He's trying to separate us, to pin us down. A third shot confirmed her words. It didn't hit a person. It hit the front wheel of the wagon, shattering two of the spokes. The message was brutally clear. No one was leaving. Tessa pressed closer to him, the derringer held tight in her hand. The smell of lavender and gunpowder was a dizzying combination. Mr. Kane, she said, her voice so low he could barely hear it over the pounding of his own heart. You need to listen to me very carefully, and you need to trust me, because what I'm about to tell you, it changes everything you think you know about what happened to your brother. The world narrowed to the space behind the water trough. Gunshots echoed from the hills. The sheriff was groaning in pain, and this woman, this complete stranger, who knew all his secrets, was about to detonate the bomb at the center of his life. My brother Thomas, Everett said, his voice a raw whisper. He disappeared the same week as Catherine Webb. I always hoped they had just run off together. It was a lie he had told himself for 3 years, a kinder story than the one the town told about him. Tessa pulled a folded, yellowed letter from an inner pocket of her dress. Her hand was rock steady, even as another bullet ricocheted off the trough with a terrifying whine. Your brother didn't run away, Mr. Kane, she said softly. He was murdered. And the man who killed him has been using a twisted version of his identity to do it. Everett stared at the letter. He recognized the handwriting instantly. It was Thomas's. That's impossible, he breathed. The witnesses, the man they saw with those other women, They described someone my height, my build. Thomas was always taller than me. He was sick, Tessa said, her voice filled with a gentle sorrow that felt strangely out of place in the middle of a gunfight. A wasting sickness in his last few months. It stooped his shoulders, made him seem smaller. But his face was still enough like yours to fool a stranger who only knew you from a distance. She pushed the letter into his hand. This was found tucked inside the lining of his saddlebag. He knew. He had figured out that someone was using the mail to target women, and he was investigating it himself, quietly, alone. A bullet splintered the wagon seat, sending a spray of wood chips into the air. Thomas discovered the killer had to be someone with official access to the postal routes, Tessa went on, her words coming faster now, urgent. Someone who could intercept letters without raising suspicion. He narrowed it down to 3 men. But he was killed before he could tell anyone. From behind the broken wagon wheel, Detective Harrison yelled, "Agent Ford! Who were the suspects?" "The territorial postal inspector," Tessa called back. "A telegraph operator in the next town over. And," she paused. She turned her head and looked Everett directly in the eye. And what he saw there was a profound, heartbreaking pity. And Marcus Webb. The name hung in the air, more shocking than any gunshot. Marcus Webb, grieving brother, tireless accuser, the man who had spent 3 years as the face of justice for his murdered sister. The man who had shown up today with a locket conveniently found in a well that had been searched a dozen times before. "Marcus has been playing a double game," Tessa said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. "Murdering women while publicly demanding justice. It was the perfect cover. Who would ever suspect the grieving brother?" Then a new voice cut through the chaos, a voice that was no longer filled with grief or rage, but with a chilling, arrogant calm. It came from behind the wagon. "Very, very impressive, Agent Ford," Marcus Webb said. "Thomas Kane was just as clever, a little too clever, as it turned out." A fire, hot and pure, erupted in Everett's chest, burning away 3 years of grief and confusion. "You," he whispered, the single word filled with a universe of hate. "You killed my brother. You killed your own sister." "Catherine was getting nosy," Marcus replied, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "She started asking questions about my business trips. And your brother was sniffing around the post office, asking about redirected mail. They were loose ends. I simply tied them up." The sheriff, propped up against the house, his face gray with pain, managed to cry out, "Why, Marcus? For God's sake, why?" "Why?" Marcus snarled, the calm facade finally cracking to reveal the monster beneath. "Because they were pathetic, all of them. Desperate, weak women willing to sell themselves to the first man who promised them a roof over their heads. They got what they deserved." Tessa checked her derringer again, her jaw set like granite. Then she looked at Everett, and her expression changed. The agent was gone, and for a moment, the woman from the letters was back. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I need you to know, I didn't just come here as a Pinkerton. What I wrote to you, about being tired of being judged, about wanting a fresh start, that part was real." He looked at her, at this impossible, courageous, magnificent woman, and in the middle of this waking nightmare, he believed her. He believed every word. "Marcus!" Everett yelled, pushing himself up slightly from behind the trough. "It's me you want. Let the others go." A dry, rasping laugh echoed from behind the wagon. It was a terrible sound. "Oh, I'm going to get you, Kane. Don't you worry about that. But not before Agent Ford here joins my sister and all the other women who learned a little too much about my business." And then Marcus Webb stepped out from behind the wagon. He had the rifle cradled in his arms, the barrel aimed squarely at Tessa's heart. His face was a mask of triumphant madness. 3 years, he hissed, his eyes wild. 3 years I've watched you, watched the town turn on you, watched you become a ghost in your own life. You were the perfect scapegoat." Tessa shifted beside Everett, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He felt her press something small, cold and heavy into his palm. He looked down. It was another Derringer, smaller than hers but just as deadly. "When I move left," she whispered, her lips barely moving, "you go right. He's fast, but he can't shoot both of us at once." Everett's mind raced. He needed to buy them a second. Just 1 second. "You made a mistake, Marcus," Everett called out, his voice loud and steady, forcing Marcus to keep his attention on him. "I don't make mistakes," Marcus spat. "You underestimated her," Everett said. "And you underestimated my brother. You think he didn't leave a trail? You think he didn't have a contingency?" He was bluffing, lying through his teeth. But he prayed it was a good lie. Marcus laughed again, that same grating sound. "Your brother died whimpering in the dirt, Kane. Just like my sister did. There's no trail." Out of the corner of his eye, Everett saw Detective Harrison begin to creep around the far side of the wagon. The sheriff, impossibly, was fumbling for his own pistol with his good hand. They were all in motion. The world was about to explode. "You're right about one thing, Marcus," Everett said, his hand tightening around the small gun Tessa had given him. "I was a fool. I was a fool to ever call you a friend." "And what's your point?" Marcus sneered, taking a step closer. "My point," Everett said, locking eyes with the man who had destroyed his life, "is that a fool is the last person you should ever tell your secrets to, because you never realized that Agent Ford sent a telegram from town this morning. It was another lie. A desperate, wild Hail Mary. The marshals know everything, Marcus. They know your name. They know where we are. They're on their way right now." For a single solitary heartbeat, he saw it in Marcus's eyes. Doubt. It was all they needed. "Now!" Tessa screamed, and she rolled left as Everett lunged to the right. The world dissolved into smoke and thunder. Marcus swung the rifle toward Tessa, a curse ripping from his lips. But in that split second, Detective Harrison burst from behind the wagon, his own Colt revolver leveled and steady. "Drop it, Webb!" Harrison roared. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't surrender. He spun, bringing the rifle around to bear on the detective. It was a suicidal move, a final act of defiant violence. He never got the shot off. Two guns fired at almost the exact same time. Tessa's Derringer from the left, and Everett's from the right. Marcus Webb jerked violently, as if struck by lightning. Two small dark holes appeared on his chest. His eyes went wide with a final, shocked surprise. The rifle clattered from his lifeless fingers. He took one stumbling step backward, and then collapsed into the dust he had so recently spat in. Silence. A profound, ringing silence, broken only by the panicked breathing of the living and the distant, mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead. It was over. Everett pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaking. The small Derringer felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Across the yard, Tessa was also getting up, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fierce, triumphant light. Detective Harrison rushed to the sheriff's side, tearing a strip from his own shirt to make a pressure bandage. The nightmare was over, but as Everett looked at Tessa, this incredible stranger who had saved his life and cleared his name, he realized something. A whole new story, one he never could have imagined, was just beginning. In the quiet that followed, the world slowly came back into focus. The smell of burnt gunpowder hung heavy in the air. The horses, their panic finally subsiding, stood with their heads low, trembling. Everett walked over to where Marcus lay, the dust already beginning to settle on his unseeing eyes. There was no satisfaction in it, only a vast, hollow emptiness where 3 years of anger and suspicion had lived. He had been haunted by ghosts, but the monster had been made of flesh and blood all along. Tessa came to stand beside him. She gently took the small Derringer from his hand. Her fingers were warm against his. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft. He could only nod, the words not wanting to come. Detective Harrison had managed to get the sheriff propped up against the house. The bleeding slowed. "He'll make it," Harrison said, his voice grim. "We need to get him back to town, and we need to get the marshal out here. There are bodies to recover." He looked at Everett, and for the first time, there was no suspicion in the man's eyes, only a deep professional respect. "Mr. Kane, on behalf of the law, I owe you an apology." "Just clear my name," Everett said, his voice hoarse, "and my brother's." "Consider it done," Harrison assured him. They made a crude travois to carry the sheriff, and Harrison rode off toward town, promising to return with a wagon and deputies by nightfall, leaving Everett and Tessa alone, alone at the scene of the crime, alone at the end of a nightmare. They stood there for a long time, not speaking, just watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Finally, Everett broke the silence. "The bag," he said, nodding toward the leather satchel she had set down by the trough. "What's in it?" Tessa gave him a small, sad smile. She walked over, picked it up, and brought it back. She unlatched it and opened the flap. It wasn't filled with weapons or spy equipment. It was filled with letters, dozens of them, and small personal effects. A silver thimble, a pressed flower in a book, a child's lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon. "These belong to them," Tessa said quietly. "The other women, the ones who answered the advertisements, the ones Marcus murdered. I've been tracking their stories for almost a year. When a woman vanished, I would go to her last known residence and collect what I could, a piece of them to carry, to remind me who I was fighting for." She reached in and pulled out one more item, a small framed photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with a shy smile and kind eyes. "My sister," Tessa said, her voice thick with emotion. "She was the first. She answered a matrimonial ad from a man claiming to be a wealthy rancher. She disappeared 2 years before I joined the Pinkertons. They never found her. They never even really looked." Everything clicked into place. The lies, the desperation, the raw courage. It hadn't just been a case for her. It had been a crusade. "I'm sorry," Everett said, the words feeling pitifully small. "Don't be," she said, looking up at him, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. "We got him. We got justice for all of them. For your brother. For Catherine. For my Sarah." He looked at this woman, this warrior who had worn the disguise of a mail-order bride, and he saw the truth. She wasn't the delicate sparrow from the photograph, and she wasn't just the hardened Pinkerton agent. She was both, strong and vulnerable, fierce and gentle. She was real. "What now?" he asked. "Will you go back?" She looked around at the ranch, at the simple, weathered house and the endless sky. "My work here is done," she said softly. "But my search for a fresh start, that might just be beginning." He took a step closer. The distance between them, which had once felt like a canyon, now felt like nothing at all. "The offer still stands," he said. "The land is honest. It provides for those willing to work it." A genuine smile touched her lips for the first time, and it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Kane?" "It's a possibility, Agent Ford," he replied, a matching smile finding its way to his own face. "A possibility for a fresh start, for both of us." The boards eventually came off the window. The town, in its shame and regret, came to help him mend his fences, both literal and figurative. The whispers died, replaced by stories of his and Tessa's bravery. His brother's name was cleared, and he was buried with honor. And Tessa stayed. She stayed, and in the quiet aftermath of the storm, they began to build something new, something honest, something real. They had both been looking for a safe harbor, a place to escape the ghosts of their past. And in the most unlikely, violent, and terrifying way imaginable, they had found it in each other. This story is a reminder that sometimes the greatest monsters wear the most familiar faces, and that the person you're waiting for might not be who you expect, but they might just be exactly who you need. If you were as shocked by that final twist as I was, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next story we uncover from the shadows, and let me know in the comments below. At what point did you realize who the real killer was? Until next time, stay safe, and always question the stories people tell.